we can't just blanket ban technology. It's not, for one, the kids are going to find a way around it, trust me. But for two, it doesn't, it's doing the same thing we're scared AI is doing. It's de-skilling people, right? I want to upskill people. I want to empower people to make their own choices. If you want to have a parasocial, there's a whole Reddit, AI is my boyfriend, right? A whole Reddit on that. If somebody wants to have a parasocial relationship with an AI, I don't think I get to tell them that that's wrong. I don't think I do. And I don't think I should assume that there's something mentally like awry or wrong happening there unless I have evidence it's causing harm, right?
It's not you, it's tech. Technology shapes our world, and yet most of us have no idea how it actually gets made. And that matters, especially as we're heading into a future of dystopia novels. My name is Simone, and I have spent the last decade in tech being the translator in the room when engineers and users need to understand one another. That's what I'm bringing to podcast format. Conversations with friends, some who build technology and some who just get to experience it in their daily lives, exploring why tech exists, what problems it is solving, and where it's headed. In What in the Tech Hell, we would try to demystify together what has become of our tech landscape and how we can build better tech solutions for ourselves, the planet we live on, and our communities. And on this episode, I sat down with three friends who live at the intersection of technology and mental health. But before we move on with my chat with Karlie, Rosario, and Fabian, here are some very quick notes for this episode. First, your follow to this show means a lot, especially as I'm starting out. So if you like hearing from people who are hands-on building tech, subscribe to What in the Tech Hell and leave a like to this episode in whatever platform you're listening on. Second, this episode is about mental health, so we do talk about topics like mental health crisis and different types of addiction, including alcohol, drugs, and porn. So listen carefully, and please reach out to professional mental health services in your region if you need. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Bye. So we're here today to understand what in the tech hell is happening with mental health and technology. And I have three guests. So it's tough to think of mental health without thinking of the user of a patient and the user of the mental health practitioner, right? So I really wanted the three of you to be here today. I'm very happy that we got the time to have you all here. Today we have Fabian. Fabian is joining as our tech side person. So Fabian brings a decade of experience as a senior software engineer and tech lead in both the HR and the healthcare spaces. Then a layoff led him to work as a maker as well. So he was searching for a mission, no projects were clicking, and his wife, who's a psychologist, suggested that he look into tools to manage porn addiction. And that's how he ended up building TrueAlly. That came up as a potential solution for that, and he's joining the discussion, as I said, to provide like an engineering background, a little bit of a tech perspective for the conversation that we're going to have. We have Rosario. Rosario is a flight attendant with over a decade of experience at a major airline, and she's a dedicated advocate for reducing stigma and improving access to mental health support and resources at her workplace. She's a graduate of Seneca College's social service worker program and is actively involved in her airline's employee assistance program, so in the EAP inside the company through its peer support initiative. She's also certified in mental health first aid and applied suicide intervention skills training, bringing both professional training and lived experience to her work in mental health advocacy. So welcome, Rosario. Thanks for being here. Yay. And then we have, from the perspective of a practitioner, we have Karlie. Karlie Chalmers goes by they, them. Karlie is an holistic neurodivergent, non-binary, and queer psychotherapist and pediatric occupational therapist, practicing at the Gary Hurwitz Kids Center for Community Mental Health and Cambrian Counseling and Wellness, both here in Toronto, right?
Correct. Yeah. Actually, Cambrian's all over Ontario. So, yeah.
Okay. Karlie holds a Master's of Clinical Science in Occupational Therapy from the University of Toronto, an extensive training in IFS, CBT, and narrative therapy, and operates from a humanistic, non-pathologizing lens that centers lived experience and anti-paternalistic perspectives. So, Karlie, thank you for being here with us. Very excited to have you in this chat.
Yeah, so excited for today's conversation.
Yeah. So for us to start getting into the conversation, I feel like it's important to get maybe a few concepts out of the way. So I want to start with you, Karlie, and then I'm going to go to you, Rosario, as a patient and an advocate. How do you two define mental health? Just for the purposes of this conversation, for like the next hour or so, like what are we talking about when we talk about mental health?
Okay, I'll take a stab at it. So, mental health, I think, is just health. I think it's like kind of already a misstep to separate it from health overall. I think that mental health can be viewed in a few different ways. So my reason for saying it's not separate from health is because obviously the way our brain operates is not separate from like physiology or like our body's processes. So I think that mental health is built on a foundation of like good biorhythms, good like physical needs being met. And so it's also a function of society and like how we can get our needs met, right? Because like unfortunately we live in a society where sometimes that's really hard to do when we don't have resources like money and other things. So I would say that mental health specifically is both a resource we draw upon for functioning. So it's like that, like kind of the energy, the attitudes, the stance we can bring to the world. And that's informed by so many things. It would take a long time to get into. But I think that when that resource is lacking, we can't kind of do the things we want to do, like our meaningful activities, our relationships. It gets in the way as like a scarcity of that resource, and it becomes a problem in our functioning. In a more like philosophical way, I think mental health is really like our own meaning making about ourselves, right? It's like kind of a phenomenological, like a phenomenon of how we see ourselves, how we make meaning in the world, how much control we think we have over our choices, our actions. So like at the core of it is like something surrounding self-efficacy, self-concept, self-esteem, and our ability to see ourselves as like agents in the world who are good and can do good things. So that's kind of how I view mental health, both as a resource and as a more like kind of abstract concept about like who we are and how we want to be known in the world.
Okay, that's an amazing definition. And I like the idea of resource because I like the idea of understanding it as maybe something that can be like filled up or depleted given the general interactions that we have, right, with the world around us. Okay, cool. Rosario, how about you? What do you talk about when you talk about mental health?
Thank you, first of all, Karlie. I think I really do want to add to what you consider mental health to be. I think it's something it's very holistic. It takes a lot of pieces to come up with what you could consider mental health when it comes to the clinical sense. In my experience, I've seen mental health decline due to various reasons, like money problems, interpersonal relationship issues, family problems, even just maybe like a spiritual malaise, you could say, a search for purpose or meaning can all really affect what mental health is. And I think that when it comes to this high stakes, go kind of capitalist society that we all live in, especially within my industry where everything is always kind of in a rush, always very time sensitive, mental health is what is affecting us from being in the present and being a little bit more aware of our well-being as a whole. And I think that when I talk about resources and accessibility to resources, it's kind of like what is available as for an individual to operate successfully within a society. And I think that isolation is a huge part of that lack of accessibility to mental health resources. But yeah, it's very broad. It's a very broad question. It's a very broad subject to talk about. Like Karlie said, it encompasses everything in a person. Just so much so that separating it from the physical aspect of health is a little bit. It can be a disservice to it, really.
Okay. So would you say that we're basically talking about health and technology today? Is that
Yeah, you could say that. I think
yeah.
just like when when you have concerns about cancer, you go to an oncologist.
Yeah.
We are talking about this aspect of health in general, which is mental health,
Yeah.
psychiatry, psychology.
All right, Fabian, I want to bring you into the conversation. How did you end up thinking about building a solution that could help people, and then to use Carlie's perspective and notion of mental health to self-actualize and try to get to something that they want to do? Like, how did you end up in this space?
Uh, yeah, thank you for that question. And that started when I was 17 years old. I went to therapy in the process that I had with my dad. And after that, I found that back in the day, we didn't have a network of psychologists together. So I started doing something with the knowledge I had. I've been programming for a long time. So I created a network back then with different psychologists in a platform. And I had like several psychologists posting blogs into the platform I created. That was my first approach to psychology. I really liked the topic, and I ended up marrying a psychologist. So I don't know, but I think I love the topic, and then she's been helping me with several things. Like she's been teaching me a ton. One day she just suggested me like, why don't you do something related to that? Like there are many different topics. One of them that was underserved was this kind of addictions that some associations or therapists don't consider like a real addiction. Others do. So there's a debate around porn addiction and other kind of addictions. But it was a real problem. I just went through the App Store and I saw different reviews and people were talking like, yeah, this is actually helping me with other competitors. And I thought like, what if I create something similar, maybe in a different way, and just have my wife as an advisor because she's actually the one who knows more about the topic. Yeah, I ended up like not just building something, but also learning about the topic, how different things like this industry is actually creating a huge problem nowadays. Yeah, I think mental health is not only, I can say like affecting men nowadays, it's affecting like other genders in general. As I saw it is, maybe we need more solutions, like not only health providers, but also the government should be involved and other organizations on these kind of topics that are underserved. And technology is actually approaching more people around. Like nowadays we have AI and other topics, and I think like we have more hands, and AI could be a really good tool to fight these kind of problems. So mental health is a huge topic, it's a huge market, but like it's something that it's not appreciated by everyone. And I think it's important for people to know that it's important nowadays that we don't have guardrails in technology, and especially with AI. And we need more to tap into that, like to understand like there are different things that we need to have safety nets around that. So yeah, just saying that it's important, and that's how I entered this world. And I found it fascinating. Mental health is amazing. Like I like what Carlie has behind the scenes. Like all brains are beautiful, and I think that's true. Like we need to explore that.
Thank you for that. That's a great journey. So we kind of discussed what mental health is. I think that's important. I think we have some idea, but it ranges in it kind of ranges. It goes from a range of like mental health is just health to what you're telling me, Fabian, is that it is still really tough, although we do agree that mental health is health and it shouldn't be like compartmentalized. It is still really tough for at least a portion of the people who use your product to actually come out and talk about mental health and talk about how they see themselves, how do they want to actualize themselves, etc. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And actually, people feel more comfortable when they can go directly to someone that is not going to judge you. And that's why people are using AI nowadays, chatbots,
AI,
and all that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I actually see that in the users, the app that you created. I see them like, I prefer to just go and use technology instead of sometimes going directly to a therapist and have like something that will help me out in this. Because if they feel that judgment is one of the core things that doesn't allow them to be open or to open up to others. So yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So let's jump into that conversation, right? So we started discussing mental health. What are we talking about when we're talking about technology? Fabian, can you maybe take a step on that one? Like, again, for the purposes of this conversation, right? Because we're going to be talking about tech a lot. How do you see technology? How would you define it?
Technology. Technology, when I think about technology, I think about automation. That's what comes to mind. So it's to make people's lives easier by just automating stuff that maybe can take more time for a human to do. Human created different artifacts or like elements in their lives to facilitate their labor. And nowadays it has evolved to just numbers and code, right? And that's what we define as technology. Nowadays we call about AI, and AI is another instrument of automation. So we're trying to automate everything, even mental health. How we can, instead of just go to a therapist, just automate like those patterns and have something that can help me out on this. That's basically the goal of technology: automate all processes as much as possible. And because we don't have enough humans doing that, so like having machines doing that, it's easier to do new stuff. So yeah, that's this. I would say that's the definition that I have in mind about technology.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the definition. The way I would tweak it, and I think it's just because we are in slightly different perspectives within technology, right? Is as a product person, I would probably say it's a tool. I like that she used the word instruments. Like it's a tool for solving a problem, right? So the problem exists and we're using a tool. This tool right now, it's majorly related to, software, hardware, and in the way that we are talking about in building. But yeah, I do like the idea of making sure that we know that like we're building things because we need things as humans, not because like the technology needs to exist by itself. The app doesn't need to exist by itself. The app needs to exist if we as humans need to use it, right? To solve a problem. So yeah, that's a great definition. Fabian just brought up, and Karlie, I want to pass this on to you. Fabian just brought up the issue of it is tough for people to look for support because they think they are going to be judged by the other human, right? Who they're talking to. As a human who does this for a job, as a psychologist, how do you kind of see that, and how do you get prepared to deal with that when you're talking to a patient?
Yeah, that's a big question. So I think judgment is a huge barrier to people seeking psychotherapy services. I think identity is also a barrier. I think different people have different experiences of how acceptable it is for them to seek care. I think, the first group of people who comes to mind is men, right? Who is Fabian's, target demographic population. It's like a lot of men are taught and reinforced throughout their lives that help seeking in terms of their emotions and their psychological well-being isn't really an option, or is a shameful option, right? And so that extends to many different, racial and different groups, either because they've had interactions with the system and it's turned out really negatively for them, or because they've just been taught that, emotion and psychological openness and vulnerability aren't worth the risk. So I would say what I do, in the field of psychotherapy, and I would really hope in the field of medicine overall, like we have really strong values of non-maleficence, benevolence. There's a core of the therapeutic alliance is to have unconditional positive regard for your client, right? And of course, lots of therapists experience compassion fatigue, experience all sorts of things that get in the way of that. So I don't want to say everyone has that experience in their therapeutic encounters with with the provider, but they should. That should be hopefully what happens, right? What I do is I think in terms of like, you know, what I think about as two barriers to being vulnerable in the therapeutic encounter is judgment, but also is like a feeling of having power applied to you, like being less powerful than the provider in terms of your expertise, in terms of, you know, if you're in crisis, I could, you know, call for help and that could literally have a carceral outcome, right? So the main things I do is I really try to rebalance power in the therapeutic relationship through externalizing my clinical reasoning to my clients, really explaining to them, like being very consent focused. And every time we're switching between a modality, even if it's a small switch, like really explaining to them what that means, offering them the knowledge to kind of be a collaborator in the process, and not just a collaborator, but the collaborator who's the lead on the project, essentially. It's the project of their psyche and their well-being, right? So I think in offering them as much transparency of knowledge and knowledge translation as I can, that allows them to make informed decisions about how we're going to work together. So that's one of the things I do. The other thing I do is that realistically, I can't control that you've probably been exposed to toxic shame in the world, right? That's not something I can just get ahead of, but I can diffuse it. So in the therapeutic encounter, whenever I hear shame arising in someone, I kind of try to get ahead of it, right? I try to say, like, interrupt that shame and say, like, that is a feeling that's coming from somewhere. Where did you learn that? Where did you pick that up? But we want to kind of excavate it from your psyche because it's not helpful and often not truth oriented, right? A lot of psychotherapy is about truth seeking and orientation to the truth. And so I think the main things I would say is diffusing shame when it shows up in the therapeutic encounter. And I would also say just like a really hyper focus on consent, transparency. A lot of the pop culture, you see the therapist is like mysterious authority, a wizard who you'll come to and will like, probably, you know, all your woes will be gone. It's like, no, we're just two people in this room figuring it out. Nobody has all the answers. I certainly don't claim to have all the answers. So I think it's about just being authentic in your stance and being transparent about knowledge translation to make sure, you know, we can work together to figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah, I find it interesting that you say that because it almost feels like the anti-internet, right? So when you say that you're like trying to understand the person's feeling shame and understand how to diffuse it and understand like how to get over those barriers, I feel like the way our internet and therefore most of the solutions that we have are built in a way that kind of reinforces the bad feelings that arise, right? So yeah, it does feel like a very different work that a different job to be done that you have there in a session.
Yeah, I was thinking about something else Fabian
go ahead,
said.
go ahead.
I will also the judgment piece. It's like I often think about the huge equity issue of like who doesn't show up to me, right? Like who doesn't enter the room, who never gets here. Because if we think about even the Mental Health Commission of Canada, right, says that it's 3/4 of adults and youth who like need mental health supports who don't get it, right? There's only 25% of people who I ever run into and help, right? And often those other 75% of people are people who are in the worst case scenarios, right? Like the people who most need our support, right? Or someone's support at least. And so the reality of like technology for me is like, you know, most care providers are like, I'm worried about losing my job to AI. I'm worried about like, you know, these sorts of big kind of existential worries. And I'm not really worried about that. I'm really interested in the way technology, as you said, Simone, can be a tool to meet people's unmet needs, right? Because there's a lot of people suffering and there's a truth of like, you know, there can be harm done by these tools. But there's a lot more harm done by just being alone with all of this and having no support, right? And so for me, the biggest use of whether it's an AI therabot, whether it's, you know, enhancing the ability of providers to provide more care because they have less documentation, less legislative, less ethical things on their plate, then I would say that is the hugest boon. That's what we really need to amplify, that using technology to meet the people who never come into my room and who so desperately need support. So I think that that's a huge thing, like what Fabian's doing to address those needs. And I think that's vital.
So you were talking about accessibility, right? So I love that topic. And that's exactly why I wanted Rosario here. and hopefully she comes back soon. But the idea that, not in every country, of course, but like mental health is either very expensive or something that feels like you need to wait a very long time to get, like wait in lines, really prove your case. In the places where it isn't very expensive, it's almost like you need to keep telling people about the struggles that you're having and kind of re-traumatizing yourself and making your situation worse in order to look for treatment. And one of the things that the technology and the way that it is made right now kind of advocates for is scalability, right? And then we can go into the conversation of like the scalability that whatever Silicon Valley is doing right now, the healthiest possible way to scale things. But when we do think about scale, we're also thinking about like reaching those people that would never be able to potentially have their mental health assessed, or have a community, and that could be a tool for that. So can you tell me a little bit, Karlie, about the issues that you do encounter in your day-to-day as a psychotherapist? And they don't have to be technology related, right? I think my goal is really to understand, like, what is the most painful thing for you in your day-to-day job?
Okay.
Technology or not.
The most painful.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. I would say that, like, psychologically, honestly, I'm going to go back to what we've already been talking about, but the access piece. I think, the reality of working in private practice is I have to turn people away for financial reasons, because it's just not realistic for me to survive in the world unless, like, I have a sliding scale. I have, like, methods to make things more accessible. And the reality is there's still a pretty high bar for what the resources you need to have to meet me in private practice, right? So I would say that integration with the way that health is integrated into, like, financial capability, financial resources is one of the most painful things. I would say that it's a big part. I could make a lot more money working solely in private practice, but I still work in community mental health despite the much more complex clients we receive, despite the higher risk and higher liability, because I want to be able to be in a space where people who need help can access good care. And I think something about the scalability that's really interesting, Simone, is that I'm gonna wax poetic about something I think about the general, because it is painful to me, the idea of, like, manufactured consent within mental health, right? So when I say manufactured consent, what I mean is the concept that, you wait in this long line, as you said, and you get into a public community mental health service, and then they offer you, 12 sessions of cognitive behavioral therapy or 12 sessions of solution-focused brief therapy. And in offering that modality and saying, like, here's what we're going to do together, and not all services do that, but some of them do, like the Ontario's structured psychotherapy program, you can only get CBT. So if I show up to your door after waiting a year in line, and then you tell me this is the only thing we can do together, right? This specific type of therapy, then what I've done is I've manufactured your consent, because now you either say I get no care or I get the care that you're offering. And so it's like, there's many different interventions that might be better suited to trauma-based concerns when these people are showing up, but they get 12 sessions of CBT. And in doing that, we manufacture consent. So that's really painful to me that, we don't actually have open consent processes in terms of how we deliver these services. So when I think about scalability, I think about this really cool opportunity we have to give these really simple modalities that right now we see in the healthcare system is easy to provide because they're easy to train people up in, easy to deliver with a high degree of fidelity, like cognitive behavioral therapy or solution-focused brief therapy. So we stop having those frontline providers provide that, and we start having things like Fabian as design provide that, right? Because these are highly manualized, highly logical and rational-based therapies. They don't require this, like, nervous system to nervous system interaction. It's okay to have a simulacra of that and be provided this intervention. And then these frontline providers can be trained in really more complex meaning-making therapies, the deep work we think of when we think of, like, psychoanalysis, internal family sisters, Rogerian and humanistic approaches. And then that way, when you wait to get through the door, we can have a more broadly trained person who can say, here's the things I can offer you. And if you needed CBT, you could have done it while you were waiting in the line with an app, right? So that's the really big joy I draw from, like, the scalability of technology, of, like, how we can, get ahead. Also, when you're waiting in line, things get worse. Like, let's be honest, they don't usually get better, they get worse.
Yes.
And so we can intervene and let them at least stay stable or get better. And then you get there and you have a real actual diversity of options that you can buy into, which intervention you actually want for you and suits your needs.
Okay. Yeah, I love that. That's also my optimistic take on what technology could do. So we were talking specifically about accessibility, right? And I know that's a topic that you and I have talked about. So I do want to bring you in here because we are talking about needing health support, specifically mental health support, and either having to pay a lot for it or having to wait in line to be able to get it. And then when you get it, it is sometimes not the most adequate to your situation. And technology has been providing another timeline, let's say, for mental health practices and for mental health crises. So is this something that you can potentially touch on and how technology kind of makes that more accessible to you?
Yes, I think before I got disconnected, I was listening to some of the stuff that Karlie was saying about accessibility and about who doesn't show up to getting mental health services by human professionals, let's say. And I did want to, I think, illustrate a little bit about what's the environment around mental health, accessing mental health resources within my industry. I would assume that most safety-related industries can have, let's say, carceral outcomes, not necessarily that, you'll get sent to jail, depending on the severity of your mental health issue. But I've seen a lot of colleagues of mine hesitate to reach out for help in mental health issues because of that kind of carceral judgment fear that I'm going to lose my job. I'm in a safety-related industry where if I reach out for help, if I say that I'm not okay, I could become a liability and a dangerous liability at that, since my employment is so safety focused. And I think that it does stop a lot of people from reaching out for mental health resources. And yes, we do have EAP programs. For example, at my airline, a lot of employers do offer employee assistance programs for different industries, but specifically for my airline, they're usually confidential, they're free for employees and other families. We have peer support volunteers like myself who can show up on flights and kind of offer their assistance to be like, I'm here to listen to you if you need to talk to someone, just to kind of like almost like a safety net in between the moment that a mental health issue arises to when it becomes a crisis. And I think that as helpful as that is, there's still that fear of judgment that not just flight attendants have, but like anybody has. But I think it is highly pronounced in flight attendants because we are supposed to, I have a theory that it's because we're supposed to know what's happening at all times. We're supposed to be like a figure of authority and a figure of calm at the same time for passengers, for people around. I feel like a lot of public-facing employees in a lot of industries tend to be that like face of a company that has a lot of pressure to be and perform a certain way. I mean, even the concept of emotional labor was first coined because of flight attendant work. So I think when it comes to that emotional fatigue, it can lead to a lot of specific mental health issues that may have a lot of stigma. For example, flight attendants there's a higher prevalence of substance misuse compared to general populations when it comes to flight attendants, usually driven by alcohol and sometimes drugs. These studies indicate that factors such as work-related stress, fatigue, emotional fatigue, and obviously the crazy schedules like night shifts and everything do not help into that mental health challenges. But I guess my point is that because of the job that I have or because of the industry that I'm in, I can relate to the concept of feeling like I don't want to be judged for having an addiction issue. I don't want to be judged for having a mental health issue that is going to cost me my job. And not just judged by the company, it's judged by other employees. Depending on the airline or the industry, you're afraid of being reported by your other colleagues to management. I am grateful to HR to a certain extent, because I think that without HR, EAP wouldn't really exist, because things like employee assistance programs are not mandatory within Canada. So I think it became more of an issue of like attendance and just human resources and in itself. And I think that what I like about getting back to the question of and technology, as much as us peer support coordinators want to be present for people to talk to as one-on-one as a person, there are moments when colleagues don't want to be like that shame and that fear of judgment is too great. If someone's having issues with alcohol while on duty, I'd rather that they reach out to AI or some other online service than not reach out to anyone at all. Because I can show up on a flight and be like, I'm a peer support coordinator, you can talk to me whenever, but maybe we don't jive. Maybe this person doesn't trust me. Maybe even I'm not the kind of like the target audience, right? Because employments have very different kind of groups of people. I appear like a young millennial queer woman, but maybe there's a 50-year-old man that needs assistance. They're going to hesitate a little bit more in reaching out to me as a EAP support volunteer than someone maybe on your website, Fabian, TrueAlly, you know? So I think that as much as I would prefer one-on-one personal accessibility to services, I think it's kind of like what patches can be done while they're reaching out to I don't want to say real help, but it is. Because I do worry about AI and technology being a short-term solution to a much larger problem. And there's so many times that you can patch holes in a big tank before it bursts completely. Does that make sense?
Definitely. 100%. Fabian, I want to go to you, but I also just want to say I agree with you, Rosario and Karlie, when you're saying that mental health is just health, right? We need to treat it as any other part of health, of our body, of our well-being. But I would not be afraid to be fired because of a broken leg, right? When you tell me that people are like afraid to be laid off because of their addiction, it's something's different there in the way that we approach it. Maybe it shouldn't be like we should look at our well-being as a whole, but something's different in the way that we're approaching it in real life, right? That we're making like some of these things way more shameful than others that kind of require that extra layer of privacy for us to allow ourselves to get treated. And then I want to jump to you, Fabian, because your app is touching on a difficult problem that there is a lot of judgment about in society, right? So when you were building it, you did say that your wife's a psychologist, so that she helped out. But like, what were the considerations that you had when you were building TrueAlly when it comes to like the experience that this person is having, the problem that's being solved, how you're dealing with their data?
Yeah, well, first I had to go to different apps and see what was the state of the art, and look at different reviews in the App Store and the Play Store to understand, like the different issues technological wise. First, that was my first step to understand like what was the real problem and how technology was solving that problem for this kind of like people a population in the world. Then I asked her like, what was the different problems that you see with people that maybe come to therapy and they are open about this topic. She told me like different ideas or things that were happening, especially in family, people that maybe are religious people, and how their identity and values are affecting because they're not living up to their standards that they want to live. So that actually provided me more information. I had also to read. I wanted to make this app science-based. So I went through some literature, like, for instance, Your Brain and Porn is a good one with a lot of studies, a lot of research I also read about cognitive behavioral therapy and other kind of therapist approaches to just have a understanding of what were the approaches the different therapists they used in the process, right? Based on that, I just started working with some ideas that I had in mind, having something that was like a minimal viable product, and I just put it out there. Some people were started using it, and they were giving me feedback, especially on things like, yeah, I like the idea of just getting every time in the app, but I need something to help me reflect on it like every day to actually understand what are my positive emotions, my negative emotions, like my self-care every day. And based on those markers, I call it like that, actually like have features in the app that prompt me to act to change, to apply the different approaches in therapy. Something that I have always in mind is that this is not a replacement for therapy, and actually on every feature in the app, I'm always saying like, hey, just if you feel that this is not helping you, this is just a tool, but you need to go to therapy. That's important to clarify always. And I think also, well, what I did is to have like three pillars in the app. The first one is learning. The other is connection. It's important to have connection and action. So that's how the app is distributed and how people are using it. But I see like different things that it calls my attention. For instance, something I learned is that the 72 hours are critical. The first 72 hours in the app are critical. Like users that go into the app and they actually quit, like just remove all the pornography videos or content, sexual content that they have, and they commit to the app for the 72 hours, they're more likely to get to the 30-day mark, right? So that's something that just looking at the data in an anonymized way, because anonymous is important to the app, I found that people who did that, and also if they had some sort of relapse, if they come after the relapse into the app, they're more likely to also continue into this progress. So something cool about it is maybe in therapy you're open to your therapist, but if you have data points, I think that improves the process, right? Rosario was saying that sometimes you don't have access to the therapist right away because you're at work, but you have your phone with you and you can access to a chatbot. So I think AI and the new apps are just immediate help. Like it's immediate support for you. It's the first aid of emotional access that you have. And I see these apps more like a triage sort of tool, like something that can help you understand those data points and say like, hey, you're stressed right now. Maybe you didn't have enough sleep. Maybe you have like these negative emotions. So you need to calm down first. Maybe it can give you some like techniques to calm down, mindfulness or any other tool out there that can help you out, that is proven that's going to help you. And then it's going to route you to the therapist when it's available. So I think technology should be like the triaging part, like getting the user to know that you're not alone, that it's okay to feel that way. I can give you tools, but you need someone to help you out. And I think if we put the technology into consideration into that part of the process, it's going to be easier for therapists to actually know. And if we connect that, if the user are allowed to share that information with therapists, because I think it's important, privacy is always first in the process, that's going to be better because now therapists, they have more data to analyze. They know, okay, Fabian is doing this during like this month, and maybe they say that they have these kind of emotions, or maybe they're not getting enough sleep. Why is that happening, right? And that data can be useful in the therapy process. So AI is not there to replace a therapist. It's actually to enhance the process. And I think that's where tools like this are useful. There are other, like some of concerns about privacy or security. That's something we can maybe talk about later. But yeah, I guess my point is technology is there to be the to help you out when you actually need it. If you're maybe at 3 a.m. in the morning having thoughts and your therapist is sleeping, and you can just go to the app and say like, hey, okay, what tools can I get from this? How can I organize my ideas so I can speak later to my therapist, and yeah, maybe that can turn out into something that is useful.
Thank you. I will touch on security and data privacy, right? Because I think anonymity, and when we're talking about judgment and the judgment that we face when we're looking for help, like there has been so many data leaks, and one very recent, I don't know, Fabian, if you know about this one with a competitor of yours specifically. So I do want to touch that.
I think that what Fabian touched on is very noble. I think that as a creator, Fabian, you have the right. It seems you have the right thinking in mind. You have the consideration of who your users are, and I think that I do worry, as much as I want technology to be there for someone, like you said, at 3 a.m. when their therapist or their psychologist is not available, as a safety tool. What I worry about the most, though, is how are these tech companies being held accountable when things don't work out? Like, for example, I found out about this individual called Anthony Duncan, who first used ChatGPT to help with his business side and career and content creator, but then while still using OpenAI on a daily basis, the AI started encouraging his delusions to the point that he was kind of stuck in this psychosis loop for months. And I have a true concern about the fact that technology is so easily accessible, especially AI, as a helper to immediate mental health crises. That it's actually, like you said, there's so much you can remind people that they need to get, they might need professional help for their mental health. But it's not just my therapist is asleep at 3 a.m. or I'm on a night flight over the Atlantic. It's, do I have money to pay for these therapies? And even to, if Karlie wants to add to this, there's so much CBT can help with specific mental health issues. The same with addiction. It's like there's so much that mental health therapy can do when you need to have a physical withdrawal from your substance of choice. I think that having technology be accessible is important, and I think the privacy of it all is very important, but I think, still need to remember that AI is not a person, and it's not, sometimes people tend to use technology only because it's so easy, because there's that anonymity, and then there's no danger of being judged that a person might. And I think it almost, in a way, not always, but almost in a way, it might stop people from reaching out for professional mental health help from an individual rather than a bot. And I think that we need to hold manufacturers of AI more accountable for this stuff. And I think that these are tools that were supposed to be created to help us, not to just be used en masse, whatever the consequences may be. Anyway, that's my 2 cents, if anyone wants to respond to that.
Yeah, Karlie, do you want to go?
Sure. I have a response partially to Fabian, and then I'll follow up with a partial response to Rosario. Yeah. And I'm kind of just going stream of consciousness here, so hopefully it's able to be followed. So what I'm thinking is, Fabian, you mentioned the idea of triage. And I think this ties into Rosario's part really nicely because mental health is, as we said, like highly complex, right? We think about all sorts of issues that can come up. Just like off the top of my head, there's distorted worldview or sense of self from trauma. There's emotional dysregulation that can cause us to have a colored idea of what's happening in the world there. And then there's things that are psychosis spectrum illnesses where we're truly reality disoriented, or OCD where we're having, a distortion of reality and behaviors related to it. And so when we think about triage in my psychotherapy practice, this is something tying it back to shame at the beginning. I have a triage model where I start with, this is actually drawn from a really great psychotherapist out in BC. His name's Michael Towers, and he's doing a lot of research on non-pathologizing psychotherapy. And I think about the medical model and how we really treat symptoms and deficits instead of the whole person, as you said, Rosario, right? And so when someone shows up in my therapy room, I think, what are they doing to survive, right? What are these mechanisms? I call them external control mechanisms. And other words people use for them are, maladaptive coping. I don't like that language, but people will say that. Things like addiction, self-harm, binging and purging, anything that you do to kind of survive pain and numb it, right? Or to orient it to it differently. And so when I think about the first stage of triage, it's like you're using these external control mechanisms, and I want to reframe them as protective responses of the human psyche. They're natural and they come up because there's a problem. They're a flag that there's a serious problem, right? And so it does speak to there being a challenge, but that challenge isn't just in the person. The person isn't the problem. It's often the environment and everything else. So my triage model is address those external control mechanisms, but not through trying to get rid of them, right? You say porn addiction. Porn addiction is an external control mechanism. It's a form of coping, right? And so I don't want to get rid of it. I actually want to celebrate the way that's been protective to the psyche. And then once we've celebrated the way it's been protective to the psyche and we've diffused shame, then we can move into grief work and like what is going on in the background that the pain is originating from that we can now process. You don't need this external control mechanism to get ahead of the pain. And then my last triage stage in psychotherapy is, identity and empowerment, right? Like how do we reinforce who you are and how you want to be known? How do we make you the person you want to be in the world, and how does that become a stable base of functioning? And so when I think about what both of you are saying in that first stage, I think that the AI, therapy models that we're using, for one, they should not be open LLMs, right? They shouldn't be ChatGPT. They should not be Anthropic, like Claude. They shouldn't be that. They should be trained, university produced, controlled, things like what Fabian's making that's based on research, right? And I think really deeply, they should only seek to address that first stage in the triage. How do we start to educate you about your feelings, your thoughts, your behaviors, and why the problem is there to begin with? And I think that education piece of diffusing shame around these coping methods and helping you get underneath like where they're coming from is what these these chatbots that are designed for therapy could be so good at, right? And then you arrive to me, and there's sometimes a problem in psychotherapy of like people arrive to me who have like really no knowledge about mental health. They're very like, there's a lack of literacy in the psyche and emotional well-being and things like that. And I think like I'm kind of like a math teacher trying to math professor at Harvard trying to teach like a kid who's trying to do basic algebra, and there's a mismatch, right? But if they'd used Fabian's lovely app before they came to me, they'd have all of this knowledge and data to bring to me. And we could really use my time and their time together in the most effective ways, rather than with basic psychoeducation, just kind of laying out the groundwork, right? And so then change, like the process of complex change that happens through the therapeutic relationship and psychotherapeutic modalities can happen faster because we're not starting at the starting line. We're starting a little bit ahead. And education is something a tool can do, right? That's not something you need a human in the room to do, as long as the person knows their learning style and can engage with the app appropriately. So that was one of my points. Another point is, when we think about psychosis spectrum illnesses, like you mentioned, Rosario, that gentleman, I think I saw him on Instagram too, he had a really horrible time because of that. And I think about, I worked in forensic mental health, I do have anti-carceral perspectives, but I did work in forensic mental health for a while. And I think about all those folks and how vulnerable they are to, their reality being disrupted. And so when we think about reality testing, there's a point in the psychosis spectrum where you can't orient people out of their psychosis. Only medication can do that, right? But there's a point earlier on where we call it, there's flexible delusions. And at that stage, you should be trying to orient someone to reality still. And you can, a clinician can check in, where are they on the spectrum? Is it a rigid psychosis or is it a flexible psychosis? And how do I engage at each stage on that spectrum? And so something that's really important is that the sycophantic and overly validating nature of AI at that early stage reinforces delusions, reinforces neurotic thinking, right? It is very dangerous if it does that. And it can skyrocket someone's psychosis. It can really worsen an obsessive compulsive loop. And in that way, it poses a huge risk to some of the most vulnerable people who can lose insight within their mental health and their reality orientation. So it's scary stuff. But that's why I really advise people to stick with apps designed for therapy with mental health professionals putting in input that are based on research and being researched as well on the other end after production, right?
Yeah. And when we touch on like how we design the technology around that, the reason why something like ChatGPT, for example, is so sycophantic is because the metric. So Fabian talked about the metric that he's using. So he's using whatever accesses and returns and logins in the first 72 hours, right? Say the metrics that are kind of the north stars for these types of products is the time you spend talking to these products and how long you spend communicating with a bot. So the goal is not to like help you out of a potential psychosis episode, right? The goal is to keep you there. And if the goal is to keep you there, it's definitely not the product to, be used in a mental health crisis situation. So the incentives feel very misaligned. Like the incentive for the companies to keep you there for longer touches on how this market needs to be maybe a little bit more scrutinized. And then on this point, Fabian, I want to bring you into the conversation because we talked a little bit about data, right? And you're all saying, so if I have an addiction, if I have a problem that it's tough for me to talk about it at work, I want to deal with it in the most private possible way. And the internet kind of provides us with that illusion of privacy. Specifically with vibe coding, etc., I expect these things that we're going to hear about now to get even worse. But this one app that was also an anti-porn addiction app had thousands of users' data leaked. So it's very easy to find entry points into the data that these apps are storing, right? So when you're talking about your mental health and you're, I don't know, discussing something with an app or adding your porn viewing habits into something that can track it, companies should keep that data private, and companies should make sure that that data is not available on the internet, especially when it comes to things that are so sensitive and so surrounded by shame. So Fabian, I want to bring you in. I don't know if you heard of this case specifically, but like how do you think about this, and what have you been seeing around data specifically and the type of app that you have?
I didn't know specifically about this one, but actually that's an important problem that happens. I remember how they built the app, their story, and I think there's a problem when you're building something so fast nowadays. When you're vibe coding, which means you're using AI to do the job for you and to create more features and more features. Because now we're kind of competing against each other, but we don't have the user in mind. What is happening with my data? What happens with my standards? It's tough to hear something like that. We have hackers and a lot of people that are eager to get the data in order to get money. And I think something that comes to mind is two things. The first one is that you need to actually have standards of security in your code. There are like companies like OWASP that they have a list of different standards that you can have like a checklist on the things that you can implement in your app. Encryption is really important in the data. But a second thing that is important is how to de-identify the information that you have for the users. So you cannot like couple, let's say Fabian wrote like this journal last week. You need to be able to say like, hey, this journal is there, but maybe the user base is in another place. And that secures a little bit more the data. We have also some rules in countries like United States, like being HIPAA compliance, removing the personal identifiable information, and also using the correct platforms or the correct infrastructure to store your data. If you're maybe using Google's infrastructure, or Amazon, they have data centers. They have layers of security, and that assess that your data is actually saved, right? But you need to be careful about that. Aware that if you're implementing something, yeah, it's good to have new features, but it's more important to go slower and take care that your data is safe and that you actually have the security that is required for your data. With byte coding, what happens, to explain you a little bit, is maybe AI is really good at implementing new things, right? But when it comes to configuring some of the platforms that you use to store the data, sometimes AI implements something basic, it works, then I continue. And it should be like that. It's actually, the configuration is correct. I'm putting it in place the correct guardrails for the system. Am I using the correct standards that the industry require? Like, those questions are really important, and not like moving faster because of the sake of competing and having the great product that you need and the people is looking for. So I've been trying to just do that with TrueAlly, and also something that Karlie mentioned, and also Rosario, is sometimes AI is not the best at giving you the correct information, and maybe it's reinforcing your delusional thoughts. And for that reason, in TrueAlly, you won't find a therapy bot for now, because I'm afraid that, I'm worried that maybe someone comes and the chatbot is gonna say something that is incorrect. So what I try to do is apply AI in just one way. Like, the user is given information, I try to anonymize the data, I create a really good prompt with some constraints on it that are important, and then the AI is suggesting you what to do. Like, maybe this activity is good, maybe like doing this in the app is better, maybe analyzing the data, but not suggesting or saying like, yeah, maybe what you're doing is right, or maybe validating your ideas. It's more like using the data that's there for you, that is anonymized, for the use of the app. So I think that way is safer. That's why I haven't implemented something like a chatbot. I think we need some like guidelines. I need to some agreement, like different platforms, on what is the best use for AI. Even as Karlie said, like maybe having universities in place, like saying like, yeah, based on research, we need to improve the quality of chatbots or use these techniques to fine tune it, or to have techniques that will help the app to become better, or the AI to become better, to have a better output for the users. Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. It's by no means is I know everything. I think I need to improve some stuff, but I need to be careful when I'm doing something if I create a new app.
Yeah. I'll go to you, Carly, in a second. Just one point of what you brought up that I think it's worth exploring, Fabian, too, is when we're talking about using AI, specifically like mass marketing is making our brains go straight to it's a bot. There are many ways that you can get the benefits of using AI and, helping in other parts of the work in your app, in your software, without necessarily having a bot that's going to talk to your users for you. So that's important to maybe for us to kind of disassociate those two things. But yeah, Carly, go ahead.
Yeah, Fabian, I think as Simone said, there's like a lot of perverse incentives within the production of these tools because of money, because of people competing against each other nowadays with vibe coding and everything. But I was thinking, like, I don't want to be too alarmist either, because this doesn't just happen with these apps, these privacy breaches, right? I think of Humber River Hospital, a very high tech, cutting edge hospital that was opened a few years ago in Toronto, Ontario, and it there was a information capture hacking incident there, right, where they captured all of the files on the electronic medical records, and then they held them hostage and sold them back to the government, really, right, in the hospital. And of course, there's like really good safeguards in terms of the privacy Commission of Ontario, the privacy officer at that hospital, and like federally investigated that and tried to make big improvements. So there is like a more investment in, as the problems arise, how do we fix them and safeguard this information for people. But I just want to say in the service of like, these tools could be really helpful to a lot of people. And the reality is like, there's some good hackers out there, and you know, we can safeguard things to a very extreme degree, and sometimes things still go awry, right? And so I think it's a scary environment to know that, and I think there needs to be a lot of people working on the safeguarding of privacy information, but there is a real fragmenting as we have more private companies getting their hands in the pot of this, in terms of like, are all of those companies really doing what the best practice is? And that makes it a higher risk situation. The other thing I was thinking was just regarding, like, I was thinking about the parallel of like a self-driving car, right? It's like, you know, if a self-driving car is made, it'll probably have far less accidents than like a human driver, right? But one accident is like kind of a PR disaster across the board for all of these companies that are engaging in this form. And that's the thing when we're at the cutting edge of like technology, is that one misstep can be really like, you know, big signal within the media, right? And so I think like, sure, there will be missteps as we head out in this like forefront of like discovery to using technology to help people's mental health. There will be missteps, but I want to say, like, I work with therapists, and there's missteps in human therapy all the time that cause real harm, serious harm. The other thing I was thinking about, this is just a thought that cropped up in my brain, is like, one harm that can occur in having a bot in your pocket all the time that's helping you is dependency, right? The great thing about therapy is it's 1 hour a week, it's compartmentalized, it lets you go really deep into the psyche and then surface and come back into your life. If you constantly have this app in your pocket, not only may you not be like dosing psychotherapy appropriately to yourself, it could create really fast gains behaviorally, that could be great, but it could also create dependency. And my goal in psychotherapy is always to empower people to be, you know, autonomous in keeping their mental health going. And I worry about the dependency aspect of chatbots. It's like, you know, in what ways does that enable not having, like, you know, these skills? Like, you know, we talk about AI de-skilling people, right? Are we actually upskilling people's ability to manage their mental health, or are we actually just making them dependent on a tool? And I mean, maybe even if it is dependency, maybe that's better than suffering. I'm not sure about that yet, but I do think that's something to look into.
Yeah, there's this idea of gradual disempowerment, right? Which is technically how we're going to be overpowered by AI, is mostly because we might just, you know, forget how to solve some problems on our own and just hand them over to AI. Rosario, I know you have comments. I do have one question to add to your comments, which is, does this data conversation and how, say, ChatGPT, how OpenAI is going to use your data, like, does that come into play at all when you're kind of in a stressful situation that you need like very quick advice?
Thank you for asking that, Simone, because I think it really adds to my point, the point that I'm going to bring up. I myself used AI bots in not necessarily crisis situations, but in a moment where I need to go over a certain interpersonal problem and I need help drafting like a request or a boundary setting that I may not have access to my therapist for a few more weeks. But it's a time sensitive issue, and I think that even within myself, I have very conflicted feelings about using technology as a mental health aid, because I do, like Karlie said, worry about the monetizing as an incentive rather than the mental health well-being for these technology companies. And I think that I do wonder if they do produce some good, like the times when it did help me voice out my concerns in a respectful way in an interpersonal relationship. At the same time, is that dependency on technology, or the de-skilling, as you will say, as systemic harm? Is it worth when is it worth the harm? Does that make sense? And is legislation the only way that, you know, these technology companies can be held accountable when it comes to like the incentive of creating these bots that are meant to help individuals? I think, like you said, Karlie, and Fabian, I think these tools are so helpful And I don't want to be a technology hater. I think that, like you said, Karlie, we are at this forefront. We are at this very crucial moment when we can start to learn to use these tools in a way that helps the most people. But the problem is the incentives. And I think that is that the main, and I think it's a question for maybe Fabian as well, or maybe Karlie, if you've seen it, is legislation, is enforcement the only way that we can hold these companies accountable for making tools that create more harm than good? Or maybe they are creating good, but there's still the far few that fall in between the cracks.
Yeah. So there's actually a case that I wanted to bring today and touches specifically on that. I'm going to pass it on to you, Fabian. But actually, did they settle? No, I think Meta was liable. Yes, both Meta and YouTube were found liable in a mental health related case. Someone who argued that both YouTube and Instagram were like the companies knew what they were doing with the functionalities in ways that made this person very dependent on their tools, and they started exhibiting mental health issues because of these tools, they claimed. And this trial just ended this week. And for the first time, Meta and YouTube actually were found liable because of the design of their platforms, right? Because I think there's also a difference between, like, for a while they were like, oh yeah, but people can post whatever they want on the platform, and the conversation was a lot about the content. Now the conversation's shifting into the design of the platform. Like, you're designing the platform in a way that tricks people into spending more time here, or tricks people into giving more data than they understand that they're giving out to you, etc. So there are new developments in this space. Personally, I really don't know what the answer is. I wish I knew. That's why this podcast came about. So, Fabian, what have you been seeing around both the ethics and, like, how these companies are designing the platforms, and if there is any way to kind of keep them accountable and keep them, keep their work kind of transparent for the users in a way that users can understand what they're getting?
It's a tough question, to be honest. And I think, yeah, legislation is important. It's also important to have a good redacted privacy policy into the apps. Also, it's important that platforms like Google, like Play Store and App Store, they're more strict on when the people are submitting new apps or new versions into the app, that they actually go through and see if you are violating any of the rules that they have in place. Nowadays that happens.
Can I just comment on that? Because we were talking and we were like, they are so strict. They take apps out of the platform. So how? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, actually that happened to me last week for the first time. In the App Store, I submitted a new version, and then they said, like, you're not compliant with the wording. You're using words like porn into your description, and actually that's what I built it for, right? How else people will go and find an app that's going to help them with that issue? But you cannot use that anymore into the App Store. Yeah, it took me some time. I had to change the words for things that were similar, and then they accepted that. So I don't know if that actually is a good rule or not, but at least they're doing something in that regard.
It's almost like they're policing the wrong thing, right? They're
policing
if the word porn is on your description, but not how your app functions, or if your app has any, like, security flaws that are going to, like, harm your users.
Exactly, because they have a review process. You have to give them access to a premium user, so they go through the app and see what is going on. But I think nowadays that we have vibe coding and people are using these tools to create new apps, they don't have the bandwidth to be so detailed in their review, to just get into the app and see, like, maybe they have something that is hidden that's not compliant to the policy that we have, and they just approve. That's what I feel nowadays, because now a review takes some time, but there are millions of apps being uploaded every day. It's really hard for them to go into detail and check every word in the features that you have and see if you're actually compliant to the rules. One would say that maybe AI can help on that, to spot those things, and that could be a good use of AI. But it's not enough. I think, we need more investment into what the people have installed in their phones and what other rules are important. But I think more importantly is in your mission. Like, if you actually state that you are doing everything to have your data safe, and that's one of your goals as a company, as a creator, maybe you can be transparent on how you're doing that, maybe the technology that you're using, or the rules that you are implementing when you're creating a new software. Like, being transparent on that can give like the sense that you're actually trying to do the things in the correct way. I think that's one of the most important things, that you are transparent with your users, not only in the privacy, saying that you're not selling any of the data or the data that you're collecting, but more importantly, like how you're actually securing your app. What are the standards and how are you doing it? Like, maybe having a blog post that is a little bit more technical, but with AI, if you're not tech savvy, you can just go through and understand what is happening and if that is correct or not. Maybe we can have some sort of trust pilot for apps, something like that, like that goes through all the documents and says like, yeah, this company is doing the things in the correct way. And actually something that comes to mind is in case of mental health, for instance, the work that I'm doing with porn addiction, I don't want my app to be addictive as TikTok or any other platforms because I'm doing nothing. I want to have the engagement in a level that it's actually helping you instead of making you addictive to your app or the features that you create. So you need to be careful about that. Like, how much engagement do you have? What are your metrics of engagement? And maybe you need to have some guardrails around that tells the user like, hey, you're using this app for a long time. It's time to just go and do something else. And I don't allow the user to continue, because that is a big issue, right? And that's what happens with the media and what happened with Google and Facebook. These apps are created to get all your attention and to get you addicted to the content. And that's what creates that addiction. But anyways, what I'm trying to say is, like, you need to be careful of the product that you're creating, because maybe you're the best product manager or the best engineer and you know the techniques for that, but also you need to use it to the purpose that you're building the app for.
Yeah, and I personally believe that it should be known to the user what your main metric is, right? For a very long time, like Google was talking about the scrolls and like how many links you had to go through to actually find the right one that you wanted. Like, it is important for me to understand how you're making money out of me as a user. So yeah, let's bring that back. Karlie, any thoughts on specifically on like regulation, etc.? To Rosario's question.
Yeah, Fabian, I love what you're saying about the guard railing. And I think about what we said at the beginning of this conversation, what I said actually about, benevolence and non-maleficence and stuff like that. It's like, and externalizing my own clinical reasoning to ensure that when I'm changing modalities or I'm changing what I'm doing with a client, they're aware, and that is all transparent. And it's like, you see behind the curtain. I'm not like, trying to make you do something that you're not privy to, right? So in externalizing what metrics you're tracking, and then also the really benevolent guardrail of saying like, hey, I noticed this pattern of like an escalating use that is so fundamental to addiction, right, is happening within this current context right now. That's like designing the app to kind of do what therapists do, to challenge the person and say like, hey, I see this pattern showing up again, right? And it's not beneficial to the company financially to kick somebody off their app, but it's a signal of benevolence, right? It's a signal of like, actually, we really care about your well-being. And so how do we teach people? I think about like, I work with a lot of kids, and I work in day treatment schools where kids have dual diagnosis, neurodevelopmental disabilities, mental health diagnoses, and they have complex vulnerabilities in the world, right? And lots of awesome strengths too. But I think about how Australia and, even Canada's considering it right now, or thinking of banning social media for children because that addictive quality right at the stage in development where you so much want social belonging, want social validation, it's really entrapping and dangerous developmentally, right? But then I think, like, you know, you introduced me at the beginning, Simone, and I really believe in anti-paternalism. I actually believe even that children have capacity to make their own decisions, even if they have disabilities, right? They have the capacity to make, people have the capacity to make their own choices. And so I'm not sure about like blanket blocking social media, right? I have a real in the realm of empowering people with knowledge. And I think that there is a real lack of education in the public school system in Ontario. And I think, honestly, it's a global problem about digital media literacy, about the way tools interact with our neurology, interact with our development. And I think that one of the biggest things we can do for people is to give them really and it's also diffusing shame, right? Give them really comprehensive education on technology and mental health and media literacy growing up through school. And that could be a huge protective feature, right? Whereas I think blanketing, banning, you know, kids from communicating on Roblox, I totally get that there's child predators on the internet. I totally get that Roblox is very financially exploitative to children's, like, you know, creative labor. I think that those things are true. And I also think a lot of kids I know who have trouble with social communication differences or different neurotypes and can't access communities of neurodivergent peers or peers with mental health challenges go on Roblox and talk to other kids and have really good relationships with them through that. And growing up, I did too, right? All sorts of different video games and like sites like Neopets and Gaia Online and all sorts of things like that. You know, the reality is that we can't just blanket ban technology. It's not, for one, the kids are going to find a way around it, trust me. But for two, it's doing the same thing we're scared AI is doing. It's de-skilling people, right? I want to upskill people. I want to empower people to make their own choices. If you want to have a parasocial, you know, there's a whole Reddit, AI is my boyfriend, right? A whole Reddit on that. If somebody wants to have a parasocial relationship with an AI, I don't think I get to tell them that that's wrong. I don't think I do. And I don't think I should assume that there's something mentally like awry or wrong happening there unless I have evidence it's causing harm, right? So I think really, from my perspective, like, you know, I think there should be big legislative accountability systems where we can, like, you know, challenge companies when they harm people. But I also don't think we should have legislation that blanket controls people's behavior and how they engage with technology and tools, because I think it is paternalistic and I think it assumes we know best for people. And I think that's a mistake. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Karlie, for that. I love that answer because of a few things. One, it touches on Roblox. And I don't know if you know about the Brazilian internet environment, but that became such a scandal in Brazil, like with the Brazilian kids. They were all protesting within the game. As someone who makes tech, I could not understand that decision. Like the idea that you're going to make your app safer from predators by removing the chat functionality feels like such a lazy decision of like not really going into profiles, not really understanding what's happening inside the conversations, not really understanding the patterns that those users who are considered predators are like. It just felt like, oh yeah, we're doing something. We did something to fix it, and it felt to me like it was something that was completely unrelated to the initial conversation that it started, that created it, right? So it just feels like changing the tech for the sake of changing it to exploit in a way. And I like your point about tech literacy too, Karlie, because I do feel like when we talk about regulation, we are also expecting, like, I'm watching some of these trials and some of these conversations of like government officials with CEOs, etc. And I feel like we expect a lot from them, but they don't really know what's going on in the apps. They don't really know how those companies make money. They don't really know how the technology works like inside the app. So sometimes they're not even able to like have a fair, you know, honest conversation and get answers out of these CEOs because they're not really tech literate. And we're kind of, when we talk about regulation, sometimes I worry that we are expecting people who don't really understand the tech to regulate on top of the tech. And then the easiest, maybe like the quickest thing to be done that comes out is just like a blanket prohibition, right, of the technology for a group of people. So that does worry me too. Rosario, does that answer your question on what to do?
I mean, more than a question, it was a discussion point, just to know what other people were thinking about. But I am really happy that Karlie mentioned the anti-paternalistic approach to their practice, where it's like, as a kid, as a teenager who drank and did things I wasn't supposed to before 18 because it was forbidden, I can totally relate to that concern that teens will get around the social media ban. In fact, according to some of the news that I've watched myself, they already have.
They are already getting, yeah.
So I think
they are already getting.
I guess I do wonder, and this kind of brings me back to how I first kind of reached out for help for my addiction, was going to AA rooms, like 12-step program rooms that sometimes people see on movies and TV. I think that more than technology was really helpful for me to go in person and hear people talk about their issues. And I think that it helped me a lot with finding more about myself, researching and discovering more of my triggers, as well as kind of seeing hopeful reminders that you can live with that. You can live past these struggles. And I think that as much as I do think that technology is helpful, I think for me in my recovery of mental health, connecting with other individuals has always been way more effective. I'm not saying that I haven't used technology for mental health, like that would be lying. The convenience of it is too much for me to completely disregard that tool. I think that we're at this point where we want to use the tools to the best of our ability, but once again, that incentive of wanting the users to be in technology as much as possible, maybe even towards their detriment, is something that is affecting mental health. Not the only thing. Obviously, there's the fact in itself that money is such an incentive to these companies to begin with, right? Like I feel like it's if companies weren't so maybe concerned about being the number one, making the most money, making shareholders happy, then their participants might be able to consider a little bit more the well-being of their own users. And I think that this is definitely not an issue that we're going to resolve in this podcast, but I think that there's such nuance to this discussion of technology for mental health, no technology for mental health. What's the limit? It's so murky right now. And I think that just like with the results of the age ban of social media, I don't think we'll be able to see the benefits of blanket banning technology for mental health until many years later.
For a little while, yeah. Yeah. We are heading to the finish line. So yeah, as we're closing, I just wanted to hear maybe one thing that is making you optimistic or hopeful about technology in this last few weeks, months in your life.
I think that I'm feeling optimistic at the sheer creativity of people using social media and technology to kind of support each other. I do remember, especially during COVID, when a lot of us that we were going to these 12-step programs were trying to kind of touch base with each other during the isolation and the stay-at-home mandates. I do remember how some of these technologies have stayed and have legitimately helped individuals. Like even my own participation in the EAP program, I don't think would have been possible if these technologies weren't already set in place, because then I wouldn't have been able to attend the meetings that they had, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that it's definitely not a perfect technology, but it doesn't, as many faults as it has, it also does have very useful tools for mental health. And I can't fully discount it. Yeah, it concerns me. Parts of it concern me, but I cannot discount it as a very helpful tool for some folks.
Yeah. Yeah. I am also excited about how access to technology will help us unleash creativity too. That's on my radar as well. Fabian, how about you?
I would say the improvement in LLMs, large language models, especially in areas that right now LLMs are really good at natural language processing, which means understanding text and giving you text, right? But there are other areas that are important, like reasoning. People think that LLMs are really good at reasoning and that they're actually thinking like a human, but that is not true. Those are just techniques that engineers use. That is, I think, a field that I'm excited about, how our scientists are using the brain as a tool to improve technology, and they will help to solve so many things. For instance, what we've been talking about, like detect a conversation and say like, okay, is this actually safe for the user or not? Also have other capabilities that are getting better every day, like visual implementations, like video, other kind of inputs. Computer vision is an area that is very interesting and difficult, but if AI can get better at it, it's not only giving you information about, like, for example, text, but also understanding your facial expressions, like how you're feeling. So the mix of reasoning, like having other sources of input to LLMs, I think that's something that I really like, and I hope that is actually helping the users to improve in other areas, especially mental health. Like those tools will be a solution for many things, many problems that we have right now. Yeah, we're improving every day. So I hope to see more reasoning into LLMs, more vision computer algorithms. And I think that's really cool to see, like how that integrates into the process. Not to replace again a therapist, but to improve the process when someone wants to go to therapy.
Love it. Thank you. How about you, Karlie?
Yeah, I'm both extremely excited and skeptical and concerned, of course. I think that anyone who has like a sense that this is all good or all bad is probably not well informed about it. It's extremely complex. I think there's a whole bunch of technologies we didn't talk about today that could also be such a boon to people's mental health. Like I think about just like, browser blockers that stop people from searching about, really dangerous eating disorder or addiction content, and like just remind them as a blocking method, or things like the really cool research happening right now at KMH on AI pharmacogenetics, right? Like, the study of how we can match medications to people's genetics so they don't have to do med trials. Because I've been in therapy a long time, and when I do therapy with people, one of the hardest and most like at-risk time is when you're trialing new meds, because side effects can be really big and scary, and people can like not be oriented to their own neurochemistry in a way that keeps them safe. So if we can just give you what you want right off the hop, that sounds much safer, right? So, and then there's things like generative VR, where we can use like really immersive environments for exposure therapy. I think that's a really cool and safe way to use technology.
That's really cool, yeah.
Yeah, and digital phenotyping, as long as it's completely consensual, and we're thinking about all the great thing Fabian said about privacy and data. There's ways that phones can monitor like what you're searching, how often you're on the phone, things like that, to like really passively pick up on data that shows relapse, right? Like, and warns you early about it. So I think these are all ways that we can use technology that are more safe than things like LLMs, which are still very like new and we're just figuring out and philosophically reflecting and morally and ethically reflecting on. One other thing I'm really excited about is that, these documentation scribes that help you do your documentation in healthcare, they can really take a bureaucratic load off the clinician, and that allows them to have more front-facing time with clients in their office. I have a year wait list in private practice. I have like an 8-month wait list at sick kids. The reality is the less time I spend writing notes, the more time I spend with people. There's a danger in that. There's the danger that like I de-skill myself through not being reflective and having that reflexive practice through note taking. But I think we can be conscientious of that and like spend less time on just like rote typing and more time on actually actively reflecting as well. So overall, I think the one other thing I just feel not right mentioning before we end off is the reality that AI has all these risks. We know they have all these risks, like people losing their jobs, environmental crises. The reality is like these huge tools draw on a lot of resources in the world. And I wouldn't feel right in saying like, as we use these resources, how can we use them responsibly and wisely to not just create AI slop, apps that are slop, all of that kind of thing that draw resources from the world that can hurt people, but use them really like, intentionally. And I think that is something we obviously can't control. The capitalist economy economy and so many other things have a big hand in it. But I just feel like, I see the way in my therapy room that environmental and climate anxiety, job loss as an existential loss of role and meaning, and those things really are the flow through impacts of the negative repercussions of AI. And I think we have to be conscientious of that effect too. But overall, I'm excited. I think that, I'm a big techno feminist, and I think that like in the same ways, like, the Industrial Revolution and technology like dishwashers helped women. I think that like, a lot of poor folks, a lot of people who are marginalized can benefit so hugely from this. And one last warning I have is if something is free, it's not free, right? And so when you're thinking about what kind of technology to engage with in the world to help your mental health, I'd be questioning who profits off this. What is the resource they're mining from me? And if it's completely free, it's probably not safe, right? So I would just flag that as like a way to kind of reason through what kind of tools to uptake in your daily life, because your mental health and your health overall is a fragile and valuable resource you should protect.
And that's an amazing note to end on. Do we want to add anything else? Rosario, Fabian, friends, you're all lovely. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, this was really fun.
I appreciate you facilitating this. Some great questions. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you. Have a good rest of your weekend. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Simone from the future here, trying to wrap my brain around this conversation on technology, mental health, and what has been happening in this space since our chat. First of all, thank you again, Rosario, Karlie, Fabian, for sharing your knowledge with us and for your patience as this episode was getting ready. So a few things became clear to me after this conversation. First, no one wants tech to go away. Practitioners, patients, advocates, everyone seems to understand that technology, including generative AI in some cases, can be a good tool to make mental health support more accessible. So when I see the issue being portrayed just as these two sides of Luddites versus tech accelerationists, my first conclusion is that the reality on the ground where these technologies meet real people in their day-to-day lives is much more complex than that. So if we want technology that is truly useful, non-exploitative of its users, and ethical, the conversation must go deeper than the current, are you pro or against AI? What we have questioned in this episode, however, is how big tech and its misaligned incentives mediates most of these interactions and how it feels almost impossible to get away from that grip. So, if you are using generative AI to address mental health challenges, I really cannot overstate the importance of finding products that are created for mental health purposes specifically, that are based on research, and are using your data in a transparent way that you can understand. There is no going back to a place where technology was not a part of the health services in general and mental health services in particular. But we do need to be very aware of how the tech products that we use are created and how they serve us, the users and the people who are paying for them most of the time, as we strive for healthier, more fulfilled lives. This brings me to my second takeaway, which I will call here literacy over shaming. I'm going to recommend a video here from Dr. Fatima, where she lays out, with a lot of peer-reviewed research to back her up, why shaming individuals to try to curb a behavior is counterproductive, can alienate them, and make the behavior even more pronounced. The same logic applies here when it comes to technology and how we're using tools like generative AI. It is more useful for us to understand and teach each other about the structures that enable these perverse incentives to exist within the tech industry than it is to shame one another because we're using LLMs, for example. This resonates well with a part of our conversation where Karlie says that as a mental health practitioner, they don't really get to tell someone that having a parasocial relationship with an AI product is wrong. That could create the kind of shame that steers people away from health services and isolates them even further. If we want people to understand how to protect themselves from extractivist technologies, the starting point cannot be shame. And this takes me to my third big consideration after this conversation, which is the role of power and politics. I mostly agree with the anti-paternalistic stance that we talked about in this episode. People, teens included, deserve a real say and a real choice over the tools that they use and how they spend their time. This scenario presumes, however, a level playing field where sides are somewhat matched and can negotiate in good faith. And that is not the scenario in which we currently find ourselves. Let's use Instagram as an example. The two sides in question are an individual user and a $1 trillion plus company. First, let's talk design asymmetry specifically. Meta employs teams of engineers, designers, behavioral specialists that create and maintain features like an infinite scroll that make it objectively harder for your brain to disengage from the product. These teams are constantly running A/B tests to uncover how to increase time in app and engagement from users. The individual user, however, only experiences quote unquote the app they see and use and are largely unaware of the experiments being run, how they are being studied, nudged into certain behaviors, and ultimately manipulated. There is barely any choice to be made about how the app works for you individually, and Meta uses tactics like automatic opt-ins for new features or intentionally confusing menus to make it harder for users to opt out of certain functionalities. This is just one example. There are, of course, other asymmetries to consider, like access to information, resources to engage in legal disputes, and even developmental asymmetry. So if a user is a child or a teenager, their prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed yet, and engaging with these products may affect how they develop impulse control in the long run. So users and big tech platforms are not on a level playing field. So in this very asymmetric scenario, things like bans and moratoriums can actually be a way to exert power against very large corporations. I'll link up two developments worth noticing on this front. The first one is a new study that came out recently about what has been happening in Australia in the first 90 days of the social media ban for teens. Spoiler alert here, very little behavior has changed, and social media companies are dragging their feet and adapting their platforms in ways that effectively address the ban. The second thing I'm going to leave you with is the news that New York just became the first state in the US to pass a moratorium on the construction of large new data centers. And that brings me to the end of another episode of What in the Tech Hell. Remember to like this episode and follow the show on whichever platform you are. I'll see you in a couple of weeks with a conversation about generative AI in the workplace. See you then. Bye. What in the Tech Hell is created and hosted by me, Simone Lima. This show is recorded in Toronto, Ontario. I am an immigrant in this Indigenous land, which is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, also known as the Six Nations Confederacy, the Wendat, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This land is also part of the Dish with One Spoon territory, a treaty between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Anishinaabeg, and allied nations to peaceably share and care for this land, its waters, and all the biodiversity in the Great Lakes region. All those who come to live and work here are responsible for honoring this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect.